First of all, on behalf of our team, let me thank the organizers of the conference, HEDAYAH International Center, European Union, for the opportunity to conduct this important research for our country and for opportunity to share the research findings today with you. So the name of the research that we were doing was about in-depth exploration of religious dynamics in the Osh region of Kyrgyzstan. The Kyrgyzstan was clearly defined by our previous colleague in the first panel, Ms. Kaneke, what is Kyrgyzstan, where it's located, and the details around this. So the study was conducted by the consortium of 3 organizations. Oh, okay. Oh, thank you. So that's CASCADD itself, that I represent in the PIL research company. I have a colleague here, Ms. Gulnara, and the state partner, Center for Research of Religious and Internetic Situation, that is part of the National Agency on Religious and Internetic Affairs under the President of Kyrgyz Republic. We are very also thankful for this particular national agency, because without their support and help, we will not be able to access certain respondents during our research that we conducted last and this year. The overall objective of the study was to explore the in-depth the religious dynamics in Osh region, that is the south part of the country, in order to facilitate informed decision-making. And the study was very comprehensive because it was aimed to respond to the several research questions, and the main was to identify factors contributing to radicalization of those communities that we were researching. And 2 supplementary exercises were conducted to generate insights to support this goal. So one was about mapping religious infrastructure in communities, and the second was about examining religious discourse, particularly how imams, women religious leaders, and other influencers frame religious messaging. So it's briefly about the part of the country, the south part. So it was earlier mentioned that the Osh region is described because a number of people joined the ISIS groups in the late 2010s and later. But it's also can be defined as very religious, with very vibrant Islamic religious life, because it's a part of the Fergana Valley that is united by, defined by the transboundary of 3 countries in Central Asia, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan. It has diverse Islamic influences, sacred sites with pre-Islamic roots, and the interplay between traditional and Islamic practices that's contributing to a complex and evolving ethno-confessional environment. So the methodology that we used was, the study was conducted in 5 locations that were defined by our state partner as the most vulnerable due to the time that we studied. And there was certain methodologies used for spatial mapping. We used the Servicitio software and documented about more than 100 religious facilities in these 5 locations, including mosques, madrasas, Islamic cultural centers, religious NGOs, some bookstores, and charitable organizations. There was also key informant interviews conducted with 32 respondents representing the religious leaders, some civil society organizations, and state partners, based on like female and male, like gender differences between them, and local self-governing bodies. So these interviews explored religious infrastructure, leadership structures, ideological influences, and perception of radicalization. There was also participant observation that's conducted in 9 mosques during the daily Zuhr Beshim and Friday prayers to analyze religious discourse, congregational dynamics, and community engagement. Researchers documented Friday sermons, examining their themes, rhetorical strategies, and reception by attendees. These methods also allowed to assess the mosque environment and presence and role of community leaders and variation in religious messaging. And the last one, there was a social media and discourse analysis examined religious messaging and the influence this may have on the possibility of violent extremism in the target areas. So I will focus now on the mapping exercise. And so there was, as I mentioned earlier, that we did use also the Among the Service CTO tool, we did use the integrated interviews that also allowed us to understand the mapping infrastructure, the religious infrastructure in the areas. And we also used the Uri Bronfenbrenner ecological system model that analyzed the interaction between individuals and religious institutions, examining how religious spaces vary in size, influence, and accessibility. The analytical approach adopted a balanced perspective, integrating countering and preventing violent extremist frameworks, freedom of religion or belief principles, and Sharia framework for needs that classified religious necessities under Maqasid al-Sharia, the objectives of Islamic law, among which there was, should be mentioned, the essentials, the daruriyat, it's a mosque and madrasas, hajiyat, that's a complementary needs, it's a hijama centers and clothing stores, and tahsiniyat, the luxury needs, among which we can say about the Islamic bookstores that contribute to the Muslim needs in the communities. So this is a diagram that demonstrates the construction timeline of mosques in those 5 locations. And you see that the huge growth happened between 2015 and 2019. And due to different reasons, including the contribution of the global challenges that happened during this time in the world. And the historical development of this religious infrastructure in North reflected diverse political and ideological regimes. Some mosques were sanctioned during the late Soviet time. Some were constructed with the help of some foreign funding, and there was also contribution from the local communities leaders who also supported the mosque construction in the latest time. Coming to the results for this particular exercise, so the expansion of religious infrastructure in North reflects a combination of local initiatives and external influences. The mosque, madrasas, and religious businesses provided essential services, but also contributed to the complexity of the religious landscape. Foreign funding, theological divergences, and variations in governance structures created challenges for religious oversight and strategies to counter and prevent violent extremism. There was also key trends observed in the increasing emphasis on female religious education in the map location. And there was also differences between those locations, that some of the locations that had low religious infrastructure areas where people relied on informal education with limited oversight and unclear ideological content. That's also raised a challenge for state agencies to monitor and to see how the religious principles are communicated with the community. At the same time, it was mentioned that mapping confirms that Muslims in the region have access to a well-developed religious infrastructure that aligns with both the principles of freedom of religion and belief and Sharia law principles that I mentioned earlier. So religious institutions not only fulfill core obligations, but also support complementary needs that enhance religious engagement. And beyond formal places of worship and education, faith-based economic networks play an increasing role in shaping religious engagement. Religious infrastructure in the region is evolving toward a more comprehensive model in which Islam plays not only spiritual but also socio-economic role, strengthening the presence of religious communities in the daily lives of the population. The interplay between mosque clustering, foreign-funded religious institutions, faith-based economic structures, and theological influences demonstrate the increasing complexity of the religious landscape in our region. While most religious institutions operate within existing regulatory frameworks, further research is needed to assess how these dynamics shape long-term social cohesion in this particular area. So I will give a floor to my colleague. Thank you.
Thank you so much. In this part of the research, we examine how religious narratives circulate both in traditional mosques, mosque sermons, and across social media. As already mentioned, our media analysis included 13 most viewed commented social media posts across 9 channels. This sample is dominated by 3 thematic clusters with variations in frames within each: Middle East conflict, Islamic ethics, Islamic education, and right path messages. Among the key findings, how to come back? Sorry. Among the key findings, we discovered that the religious information ecosystem is now a hybrid. TikTok-style Reels, Telegram channels, and YouTube khutbahs coexist with live mosque sermons. Content circulation is intense and decentralized. The same sermon cuts reposted by dozens of accounts, often stripped of context. This viral fragmented sermon shapes faith not through structured theology, but through emotional fragments and identity-building slogans. The domestic Islamic discourse is primarily Kyrgyz language. Since content is one's native language in digital media is often perceived as a source of truth due to the effect of cognitive fluency and linguistic framing, and there are no influential domestic preachers in Uzbek language, Uzbek-speaking audience in Kyrgyzstan are often compelled to turn to foreign religious media content. Among the respondents, the two most influential preachers identified among Uzbek-speaking audience were those officially recognized as extremists by the Uzbek government. Officially, the Muftiyat provides approved themes for Friday sermons. In practice, imams freestyle, influenced by their education, personal beliefs, community vibe. Sermons mostly stuck to adapt ritual and moral conduct. Aqidah, the deeper worldview and theology, is addressed far less. That creates a knowledge vacuum, high certainty vibes, low theological literacy. People follow rules but rarely understand the why. That's fertile soil for simplified emotional messaging or ideological hijacking. In our observed khutbahs, language plays a certain role in defining social and moral boundaries within the community. We see two recurrent lexical modes: inclusive we, us language, which strengthens internal cohesion and positions the mosque as a moral anchor, and another mode, othering markers, they, them references. These distinctions are not presented as calls to hostility. Rather, they reflect how religious leaders construct normative boundaries between correct religious practice and deviation. However, where their language intersects with narratives of community grievance or vulnerability, it may reinforce feeling of isolation or threat, particularly in minority contexts. Key takeaway. Lexical choices in sermons primarily serve to strengthen religious identity and cohesion, but occasionally mark symbolic boundaries that can, depending on context, contribute to feeling of exclusion or ideological separation. And last part of our research, factors motivating residents of Osh region toward violent extremism, as perceived by respondents. Turning to drivers of violent extremism, our interviews reveal a nuanced picture. Most imams and community actors do not perceive violent extremism as an immediate local threat. They believe that the threat is exaggerated. And many emphasize that everyday concerns like migration, unemployment, and so on dominate people's lives. As a result, some view prevention programs as disproportionate to the risk or as externally driven. However, when deeper reflection emerges, common perceived factors include feelings of injustice, distrust in state institutions, limited economic and social prospects, and search for dignity and moral clarity. Among minorities, perceptions of unequal treatment or exclusion. We also discovered gender lens, interpreting risk of violent extremism. Male religious leaders more often identify structural and societal causes, unemployment, migration pressure, etc. And meanwhile, female religious actors often focus on moral and emotional vulnerability. We even saw the romantic jihad idea among some women, not rooted in ideology, but emotion, compassion, and narrative of saving children abroad. That's a reminder. Recruitment isn't always anger-based. Sometimes it's moral overdrive without guardrails. So together, these two sections illustrate a critical point. Narratives shape perception, perceptions shape vulnerability. Next slide here. And for policymakers, our findings point to three priorities to strengthen religious governance and reduce risk of radicalization. First, build transparent and sustainable religious infrastructure. We are not talking about restriction, we are talking about traceability and accountability. Strengthen inclusion through data and capacity. Effective religious policy is impossible without competent institutions and data-driven decisions. And make education and media key prevention arenas. Radicalization starts with ideas, so prevention must start in classrooms, media spaces, and communities. Last slide is about suggested future research topics, because we would like to note that many gaps remain: lack of knowledge, information in the area of religious dynamics, which prevents fully effective and adequate decision-making in this sphere. Therefore, we would also recommend a number of important areas for future research. Thank you so much.